technical seminars are an Intertech production. For instructor-led .NET, Java, and XML courses, visit us at www.intertech.com.
And as such, that's exactly what constructors are provided for you. So you can create a locale just passing in a string language, passing in a string language and a string country, or passing a string language, a string country, and a string variant. One common bug that I have seen frequently when people are first internationalizing their applications is they may want to try to combine a language and a country, and they see it represented as, for example, English in the United States would be represented as lowercase en underscore capital US. And so when they create the object, instead of passing in two parameters, en and another parameter of US, instead what they do is they call the first constructor, which takes a single string, and they pass in en underscore US. That won't work. You won't get the expected result by doing that. In addition to the constructors, there are some static properties that are available in the Java U2 locale class, and they're just pre-configured locales that you can use in lieu of creating a locale object yourself. A couple of examples: they have both language and country, so like they have French and France, German and Germany. Once we've created our locale object that we're going to use, what do we do with it? Well, we don't really do too much with the locale object itself. Again, it's really created to represent a region. It doesn't provide any specific translation or related functionality in it itself. It's what you pass along by calling a method, and the method will then look and see what the locale object is, and then decide what it needs to do based on that locale object. But it doesn't really delegate to the locale object. It doesn't call things in the locale object necessarily. There's a few helper methods and properties that are available, but again, typically it's just going to be like a label, like a name tag, so that you can look it up and say, what locale does this user want? Okay, I'll grab that appropriate information. So the actual usage is up to the developers of the libraries you are leveraging. So a couple of typical use case scenarios. We have a date, and the date is formatted for a specific region, so we pass a locale object into a date time formatter instead of just displaying a hard-coded date that's in a format that people would expect in the United States. Another is a resource bundle is selected containing text and images for a specific region based on a locale object. Sorting and searching, this is known as collation, is executed in a manner that reflects the rules of a region by configuring a collator with, again, a specific locale object. So now that we know that, it's pretty easy to create a locale object, and we're able to do that for a user. Now let's try to figure out what we're going to do with it. What kind of content are we going to pull out of our application and typically then call other API methods to retrieve that information in connection or in collaboration with a locale object. So first and obvious is text. Again, when people think about globalizing their software, that's one of the first things they think about. My applications is written in English. Now I have to display French. I'm sure I have to pull that text out. And that's true. You'll have to pull the text out so that we can choose which languages we want to use. Different languages have different sorting and searching rules. Text direction is the text. Should it be displayed left to right like English or right to left like Hebrew? And also word and sentence boundaries. What really defines a word and what defines an end of a sentence? This can be necessary through issues of displaying your text as well as trying to search through and using regular expressions and whatnot. In addition to text, you'll want to pull out numbers and currencies. Sometimes the actual numbers are different. The characters that represent numbers can be different. Other times it's just the groupings and delimiters. So for example, in the US we may represent the number you see on slide 18 as 481,000, 516.23. Whereas another region may invert that. Where we use a comma, they use a decimal point. Where we use a decimal point, they use a comma. Other regions may omit the first comma altogether and use a space instead. So groupings and delimiters, and also just the symbols that are used. So how percentages are represented, currency symbols, a different symbol for the pound or the yen or the dollar. So different symbols there. And also images. Images are something that people tend to forget about unless there's some actual text in the image. So if there's English text, for example, in my image, that may be a good indicator that I need to delegate and use a different image that has text in it with the regional specific information. But there's other things that you should also consider. First of all is regionally appropriate images. Different images and even different colors can have very specific meanings to regions and cultures, depending on what kind of context they're used. So at best, sometimes that can be confusing to users of other regions, and at worst, it could be insulting. So you need to think about different kinds of images and whether or not the images you're using have any specific regional meaning. As far as dates and times are concerned, again, we're going to want to pull these out because of the language. There may be regional specific names for a month. The format, sometimes some regions may have in the month listed before the day, some may have the day listed before the month. What kind of delimiter is appropriate? A slash for some regions, a dash for others. There's even different regional calendars. So for example, September 10th, 2009 in a Western Gregorian calendar is the equivalent date in a Hebrew calendar of ELUL 21 in the years 5769. So completely different calendars as well. And even other things that people tend to forget about, just what's the first day of the week? In America, we assume the first day of the week is Sunday. But in other regions, such as France, the first day of the week is actually Monday. So here is a code example of how we can pull out calendar date and have at runtime have this delegation so that it'll look at a locale and it will then print out what the actual date is for that specific region. So in this example, I'm just pulling out a locale that's specified when I start up the application and create that locale object. In this case, as you can tell, I'm only passing in one argument, and since I'm doing that, that means it's just going to be a language code. If I was to pass in a language and country code combined, like EN_US, that locale object wouldn't be configured as I expect. So here I'm just creating a locale object that's going to be based on a language. I use the calendar class that's inside of the Java util package. I get an instance and I pass in the locale, and now I've got a localized calendar. Next, I'm going to want to do something with the date in terms of how it's formatted. So I create a formatter by using the date format to get a date time instance. I pass in a couple of configuration bits of information. How verbose do I want this date and time? So in this case, I'm using full, which is very verbose. Spells out the complete time and the complete dates. And I also pass in my locale. That's going to return to me a formatter that I can use. Finally, then all I'm doing is printing out using the formatter, passing in the time that's inside of my calendar, and I now have a localized date.
For more free learning resources and to see the latest lineup of our instructor-led .NET, Java, and XML courses, visit us at www.intertech.com.